welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for this webinar about how to mix poultry rations. Today we have with us the three animal nutrition consultants at Fertrell. There is Jeff Mattocks, Baylor Lansden, and Rachel Teller. So for those of you who don't know Jeff, he has 26 plus years experience in animal nutrition, and he's the author of this book, Niche Poultry Feeding and Management, which is the 5th edition of what maybe you had, you knew as pasture poultry feeding and management. Baylor started his agricultural career with an education in food security. Then he got some practical experience in agriculture through diversified farming, concentrating on pasture-based chickens, eggs, and pork production. And Rachel has a background in dairy nutrition and lots of experience, I'm told, raising dairy goats, beef cattle, sheep, horses, and rabbits. So today, they will cover with us the reasons why you might want to mix your own rations, what ingredients you will need. They will give examples of balanced rations for broilers, layers, and turkeys. We will also touch on the equipment you might need to mixing your rations, and also look at some milled rations so that you have an idea of how coarse a ration should be. And then after all that, we'll be able to answer some of your questions that you can share with us by typing them in the comments below. If you want to keep your questions for that time, it will help us, not miss any. So with this, Rachel, why would somebody want to mix their own rations when they can just go to the store and buy some? I know why I do it. I like to know what's in my animals' feed. I like to know what I eat. But there are the reasons, right?
Absolutely. But you definitely bring up some good points, Ingrid. So first off, thank you all for joining us tonight while we're going to talk about poultry ration mixing and what goes into deciding on how to make your own and create your own ration. If you have any questions, as Ingrid said, feel free to type it in. And after the fact, too, you're also more than welcome to contact us at Fertrell for individualized help and questions as well. So first off, why we're going to cover tonight, why you want to mix your own ration, what goes into a well-formulated ration, some necessary equipment if you're going to mix your ration at home or on your farm. And again, looking at some of the different grinds of a ration for different, types of birds and different stages of life. So why would someone want to make their own ration on the premises versus buying from the store? So first off, we want to look at how much feed you actually go through during the year. If you're on the really low sides, you're only feeding a handful of birds, or if you're on the really high side where you might be bringing in 80 to say 100 tons of feed a year, you might want to consider making your own ration at home. It just might be easier to do it that way. Another thing to consider, though, is how much storage do you have on hand that you can store, the grains or the final mixed ration. You want to be able to store enough feed for at least a month if you can. Again, if you're making small batches, storing the whole grain is going to be better for you, because once those grains get cracked, you're going to start losing some of the nutrition. Another reason why you want to mix your own ration is location, location, location. So that just comes down to how close are you to your local mill? Are you within an hour's drive, or, is it going to be a whole day trip to be able to go and get your grains or your ingredients or your actually produced ration? Also, how many trips do you make to your mill, in a week, in a month? How much do you want that to affect your life? And then finally, as Ingrid brought up, quality control. So you can actually control the ingredients that are coming in. You can source them yourself. You can see what they look like. And you can make the final decision on if you want to use them or not. Also, if you maybe have access to local ingredients, maybe your next door neighbor is growing some of these grains that you want to use, and you have access to it for fairly cheap or relatively easily to obtain. Another portion of this would be for specialty rations. So if you really want to do something really different, really limit your ingredients for one reason or another, it's going to be easier for you to be able to mix them in your own portions versus having a mill do it, especially if it's on a smaller scale. So ideally, again, you want your feed to be fresh. You want to use it within 10 to 14 days of making it. ideally no older than 30 days. Again, once those grains are cracked, the nutritional value starts to diminish, and you'll see that in the performance of your birds. You want your ration to be balanced, which means that you want the specs and the nutrients to be appropriate for the life stage of the bird and the type of bird that you're raising. So a broiler starter feed is going to look different than a turkey starter feed versus a layer feed. And we'll go over some of those specifics as well. And you also want your feed to be accessible, starting from the very beginning. If you are brooding your birds, the chick's eating habit is formed within the first 72 hours. And so you want to make sure that basically no matter where that bird is in your brooder, they're tripping over their feed, they have access to it, and that every bird can eat at the same time. As those birds get older, you want to make sure you've got plenty of feeding space, because feed competition can lead to stress, gorging, decreased carcass quality from the birds climbing on top of each other. So all things to consider when you want to be, feeding your animals and how you are raising them. So what actually makes up a balanced ration? So when we look at our rations, we look at a couple of different key nutrients. We first look at our protein. Again, we want to make sure that it's appropriate levels for your age, breed, and production of the bird that you're raising. We want to make sure that we have high quality proteins versus low quality proteins. A high quality protein is going to take less energy for the bird to incorporate into their bodily systems and transform them into what they need them for. Low quality proteins going to require a lot more quantity, as well as a lot more energy or work for the bird to utilize them. And again, that also translates to the amino acid profile of those proteins as well. We also look at our energy. So that's the ability to support growth, production, and maintenance of your birds. And we want to make sure that they're highly digestible so that the energy is there for the birds to use. And then we also look at our vitamins and minerals. We want to make sure that these are in proper ratios so that there's no deficiencies going on that could lead to some disorders that we don't want to see in the birds, and also the particular needs, again, for the life stage of your bird. So when we're talking about protein, chicks and heritage breeds, these require higher levels of protein because we want to start the growth off on the right foot. We want to make sure that they've got plenty of protein for muscle development and initial growth. So our starter diets are usually at least 20% for broilers and layers. And again, turkeys require 26% protein. So again, a higher level. As your birds get older, you can step down that protein or decrease it as they go through their different stages of production. For your layers, protein level will affect egg size. So your older layers require less protein. Some common sources of protein are going to be roasted soybeans, soybean meal, fish meal, peas, sesame meal, sunflower meal, canola meal, linseed or flax meal, crab meal, and camellia meal. So why soybeans? So soybeans contain a lot of protein, considering that it's a grain. It contains about 36 to 48% protein, and then it has a range of different energy, whether it's the meal at about 1050 or 1600 for a full fat roasted soybean. The full fat roasted soybeans also contain natural fats at 16 to 20%, which is going to provide non-starch energy. Soybean meal is available almost everywhere. And when you look at the price breakdown, it tends to be a relatively cheap source of protein. There also isn't really any real limitations to inclusion in your diet, meaning you can have 50% or higher in your diet, depending on what your needs are. Obviously, with the full fat roasted soybeans, you're going to have to look out for your fat content. But other than that, there aren't really any limitations. But, we understand that there are areas where it's tough to get soybeans, and some people don't want to have soy in their diet. So what are some protein alternatives? So when we are creating the soy-free or using alternatives, we usually like to combine at least 3 of them, because although these are good sources of protein, they do have factors that inhibit or limit how much you can actually contain. So fish meal contains about 58 to 72% protein, but it can produce a fishy flavor. So because of that, we can only have it in about 2.5 to 5% of the diet. Peas, again, 22 to 24% protein, so a lot lower than our soybean, a lot lower than our fish meal, but they are very low in the sulfur amino acids, and they contain a lot of tannins. And because of that, limits 20 to 40%. Sesame meal is 42% protein, but it does inhibit calcium absorption. So you do have to be careful about that when you're including it in a diet. So you need it to have an additional source of calcium, and it can be included 10 to 25% of the diet. Sunflower meal is 34 to 38% protein, but it's high in fiber and it does oxidize very quickly. So you need to make sure that it's fresh. It can be included at 10 to 15% of the diet. Canola meal is 34% protein, but just like sunflower meal, we have to worry about oxidation, and it can produce an off flavor. It can be included at 15 to 20%. Linseed meal or flax meal, 30 to 37% protein. Again, an off flavor as well as oxidation if it's not fresh. So we can contain this in a diet at 7 to 10%. Crab meal, 30 to 36% protein, but it has really high salt with really low energy. So if you have a lot of crab meal in your diet, you need to make sure there's plenty of water available for your birds at all times. And we can include this at about 7.5 to 10%. And then camelina meal, it's 37% protein, but we do have to worry about glucosinolates as well as uric acid, and this can be contained about 10% of the diet. So again, when we were talking about protein, we also mentioned amino acids. So for poultry, our two limiting amino acids are methionine and lysine. Methionine is important for overall growth as well as feather production, and lysine again is for growth and performance. So these two amino acids do need to be provided in the diet because the birds cannot synthesize it on their own. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein, so they are deconstructed and then built back together to create the proteins that the birds need to incorporate into muscle, incorporate into eggs, incorporate into other body systems. The best source of amino acids is going to be animal byproducts. And that's because in the animal byproduct, the amino acids tend to already be in the configuration that the bird needs to utilize. So it's going to require less energy for them to incorporate into their bodies and to utilize. So after we figure out our protein, we do want to look at our energy. And so energy and protein have an inverse relationship in their diet. So when we have a higher protein diet, like in the summer, they tend to have lower energy. Whereas in the winter, they're going to be lower protein and higher energy. Okay, similar to our finishing rations, we have lower protein and higher energy so that we can get some extra fat put onto the birds. And so our energy, again, it's going to fuel the body systems as well as the performance of the bird. And so the components of the grain that provide energy are going to be your starch and your water-soluble sugars, which are non-structural carbohydrates, and then also fat. So fat is going to be 2.5 times as energy dense as our carbohydrates and our protein. So it's a really good condensed source of energy if we're looking for extra energy in our diets. In terms of grain, our standard for energy is going to be corn. That's because it contains about 7 to 9% protein, but it does have almost 1,600 kilocalories per pound. It's high in starch and low in fiber, so it's very digestible and the energy is highly usable by the animals. Corn also contains xanthophylls, which is going to be that yellow color that's going to be contributed to the yolk and the body. Again, corn is available almost everywhere, and again, it's pretty cheap. So just like soy, there are alternatives for corn if you want to stay away from it, or if corn is not accessible in your area for whatever reason. If you can't use corn, the best replacement is going to be grain sorghum or milo. It contains about 1,400 kilocalories, so a little bit less than corn, but you can pretty much replace it 1-to-1 with corn. Most of the undesirable factors or the tannins have been bred out of it, so we really don't have to worry about that. After that, you've got wheat and triticale. Both are very similar to each other, but they do contain high levels of pentasans. So those are some things that are going to make the wheat and the triticale less digestible for the birds. And so they can only be contained at about 30 to 50% of the diet. Oats and barley, again, you can see that they have much less energy than both the wheat and the triticale as well as the corn. Plus, they are very high in fibers, particularly the beta-glucans. And so in combination, oats and barley can only be in the diet at about 15%. So whether you have oats, barley, or both, you don't want to go over 15%. Otherwise, it's not going to be a high performance diet for your birds. Now, for all of these, we can add an added enzyme that will help increase the digestibility of these fibers, but it's still not going to compare to what you can get out of corn. After we have those, we look at our vitamins and minerals. We've got two classes of vitamins. We have our fat soluble. These are stored in the body. So these are vitamins A, D, and E, and K. And then you have your water soluble. These must be replenished every day. So you either have to consume them or the body needs to make them. Extra amounts are excreted. So again, they need to be consumed every day. And these are your B series of vitamins as well as vitamin C. And these are commonly supplemented in your ration. Our minerals are, again, broken into two classes. We have our macro minerals: calcium, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, sulfur, sodium, and chloride. And these are measured as a percentage of the diet. And then you have your trace minerals: iron, manganese, copper, iodine, zinc, cobalt, fluoride, and selenium. And these are measured as parts per million, or milligrams per kilogram. And these, again, need to be supplemented in the ration. So just some minerals that we look at. Calcium, we should all be familiar with the importance of calcium. For all of our poultry rations, we want a minimum of 1% because it is essential for bone growth and development, as well as the egg and shell production. Layers do need increased amounts of calcium over time as the shell production becomes more and more as the eggs get bigger. We want to make sure that calcium is from a readily available source, meaning it's easily digestible and the birds can utilize it. Aragonite is a really excellent source for that. And we do advise you to offer it free choice as well as in the ration. That way we can make sure that all birds are receiving it. Phosphorus works along with calcium for bone development. And then selenium is utilized for many body functions, muscle function, overall health. Unfortunately, most soils tend to be deficient in it. And as a nutritionist, we can only recommend up to 0.3 parts per million in the ration. Now, for a non-nutrient part of our ration is going to be grit. All birds need to have grit available. It is extremely important because it does help the birds break down their feed, both their pasture, forages, and their grains. The size is going to vary based on the age of the birds, and we do have a slew of different sizes available too. And you want to make sure that you're feeding the appropriate size so that it's actually functional. And then you also have to be concerned about soluble versus insoluble forms. So a soluble form is going to be oyster shell, which means it's going to break down over time and it's not going to serve its purpose. Whereas granite grit is going to stay firm and going to be able to help break down the feed. Again, it should be available free choice, even if you are mixing it into the feed, and you should start feeding it on day 2 because that's how important it is. All right, so Baylor is now going to talk to you a little bit more about our rations.
All right, guys. All right, so let me put this to the side. Okay. So I'm going to run y'all through the actual rations that you would receive from a place like Fertrell if you reached out for a ration or if you got a ration from another source. Sorry. Sorry about that. All right. So for our broiler diets, for a starter, we'd be looking at alfalfa, corn, oats, roasted soybeans, aragonite, fish meal, and poultry NutriBalancer. And a lot of these ingredients Rachel has mentioned before, but I'm just going to emphasize them a little bit as you see them in the ration. The alfalfa meal is there for fiber and for those xanthophylls, getting some coloring on the skin and fat. The corn there for energy. The oats are there for fiber and some gut health. The roasted soybeans are there as the backbone of the protein and the amino acids, as well as they're providing energy from fat. The aragonite is there for calcium. Fish meal mostly for amino acids. And the poultry NutriBalancer is what's going to make up your mineral and vitamin base. So the Poultry NutriBalancer is what you would receive from a company such as Fertrell. And then below that, you can see an analysis of the main nutrients that you're looking for in the ration. So the protein, fat, fiber, calcium, phosphorus, energy, and then the two main amino acids that we like to concentrate on, lysine and methionine. And then next to that is just a broiler grower, which is the same ingredients without the fish meal and a little bit lower protein and lower amino acids. These are some examples of alternative diets. So there's a soy-free diet, and on the far side, there is a corn and soy-free diet. So you can see that whenever you're taking out an ingredient such as soy, you're going to need some other protein sources to make up for that. So for example, in these rations, we have a crab meal, sesame meal, peas, and fish meal that are taking the place of that soybean meal and fish meal combo that we had in the regular basic ration. And then in the corn and soy free, we're making the corn part, the energy grain, up with wheat and barley. And then we'll also add that Nutrizyme, which is an enzyme that Rachel talked about that'll help break down the non-starch polysaccharides in wheat and barley. And now we'll look at some layer rations. So a standard layer is going to be made of a lot of the same ingredients that we just talked about, but it's going to have a lot more aragonite for calcium to make up those eggshells. A soy-free standard layer can look very similar. So we have that sesame meal, fish meal, peas, and crab meal making up the space of the soy meal and crab combo. And then there is the soy and corn free, which again has wheat and barley and oats as the energy grains. All right, and so for turkeys are going to start out with a much higher protein. So for a starter, we're going to start around 26 to 27. And it's, again, the same basic ingredients that you would find in the standard rations that we've been talking about, but with a much higher amount of protein and amino acids. And then for the turkey rations, we normally, or if we can, we'd like to fit in 4. That would be a turkey starter, turkey grower 2, and then finisher. So it's a step down in protein over time because we have a much longer grow out period for turkeys. So we want to fit in that efficiency of stepping down the protein so that we're not wasting any protein as our protein requirements go down over time. And these are some alternative turkey diets. So there's a grower soy-free, and there is a corn-free, soy-free turkey starter. And I just wanted to point out the extra ingredients that you would need, as well as the extra pressure that you're putting on these soy-free alternatives. And Rachel mentioned a lot of those issues. So whenever we're building something like a turkey starter, we're really pressing the top limit of a lot of those soy-free alternative feedstuffs. All right, so now we wanted to hit on some of the things that you would need to actually prepare and mix your own feed at home. And first, we wanted to hit on grinders. And obviously, as you can see from the picture, there's very many different scales of grinders. There are people that will just, mix or grind their feed for the day in a coffee grinder. And if you have, say, 3 to 5 chickens and you're very dedicated to them, that could work. And then there are other grinders that are made to fit right on top of a 5-gallon bucket. There are other ones like the blue one here on the screen that can process about like 130 to 150 pounds of different grains per hour. And then, of course, there's the full-on PTO-driven grinder mixer for people who are mixing tons at a time. And then if you're, if you're not mixing a ton in a grinder mixer and you're, say, mixing 100 to 200 pounds or less in a home, garage environment, and you just want to use a concrete mixer, you can also do that. And we also just put a picture of a bucket here because, if you're mixing up small amounts of feed every day for 5 chickens, all you really need is a bucket, of course. All right. So we might get into this later in the conversation and the questions, but some people will choose to pelletize their own feed. And so then you can purchase a pelletizer. For these pelletizers, you won't need a grinder. You can buy cracked corn and a lot of whole small grains and then meals, and then put them through the pelletizer and then cool them off and use that for feed. And there's many different size models available for the home scale use. Okay, and again, we can hit a little bit more on this in the questions, but you're going to want to aim for a particular grind for your particular ration. So if you can see on my far right, there is a ration with a lot of different seeds, and you can see a lot of whole grains in there. That would be appropriate for a layer because a layer can eat a whole small grain. So you can see those oats and you can see the wheat in there, and you can see that the corn is cracked, and you can see that there are little green peas in there and they're also cracked. And then the other rations are broiler starter growers. So they're ground a little bit more fine. The wheat is actually cracked and the corn is cracked as well. So again, for the smaller birds, we want to start out with a tighter grind. And then as we move on to more mature birds, we can have a larger particle size. But this is when we emphasize having grit to break down those larger particle sizes. All right, and now we can move on to any questions and discussion that we might have.
All right. I am going to remove that so that we can see each other. And I do have a first question here from Beverly. She wanted to clarify, should the aragonite be in the ration plus offered free choice?
We recommend that because this way, if there are birds that need extra calcium, they can go and seek it out free choice. But by including it in the ration, we know everybody is getting the base of what they need and the minimum that they need to produce the eggs or, their bones. But if they, especially for our layers, we always want to make sure that they have it free choice. You can mix it in with the grit, which would be a great way to make sure that both are available and that the birds can then consume extra calcium as needed.
All right. Beverly, if you have a follow-up question on that, please post it. But there was one that I wanted Jeff to cover for us is, let's say that you have your ingredients, you have your mixer. How long should that mixing process take? So how long should you have your ingredients in the mixer? Should it be, is there an order that you want to put them in?
Each mixer. Well, yeah, I mean, it depends on your ingredients, but ideally you want to, so what you typically do is like you'll put in your largest ingredient first, then you add your smallest ingredients like your minerals and your NutriBalancer and your fish meal and whatever. You put in your little stuff, and then you end up putting in your medium quantity items. But once the last ingredient is in, you need to set a timer, and depending on your mixer, you're going to have, if you're using a cement mixer, I'm going to say 5 to 7 minutes, right? Like a large commercial feed mixer is 3 to 5 minutes, and it needs to get shut off because you can undermix, overmix, because if you continue to mix it, and for those that are listening that are really good cooks or bakers, you've done this in the kitchen, right? You can understir and you can overstir, and there's a sweet spot where everything gets blended correctly, and that's when you need to stop and get it out of there. So usually 5 minutes, give or take 2. But if you think about 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes, and be done, right? Once the last ingredient's in, right? And a lot of times you don't even turn the mixer on until you've got at least half of the ingredients in there already, right? And then you can start letting it warm up and start doing some of the initial mixing. But yeah, you can definitely overmix. That is the most common mistake I see is people think, oh, the longer I let it in there, the better it's going to be. No, that's not the case. So it's 5 to 7 minutes. And after the last ingredient, you'll be a lot happier. It'll be a lot more uniform.
Right. Something else I would like you to cover as well, because it comes up often, is more ground is not better.
More ground is not better?
Yes, you don't want to grind it too much. It can't be too fine for birds.
Right. If we had that picture, I sent you pictures earlier. I don't know if you prepped any of those. But those pictures that Baylor had in his presentation, those are all chick starter feeds, except for the last one. The last one was a layer feed. But yeah, the first two, those were actually a chick starter grower feed. And people look at that like, chick can't get that down. I assure you that if a chick can get its beak around anything, it can get it down. Okay. So we tend to overcompensate and grind things way too small. We're actually working against what our bird's metabolism is made to do with the gizzard, all of its internal systems. Look, the more often that gizzard has to squeeze to get nutrients, the healthier and stronger your bird's going to be, right? So nice, big, chunky, think granola-like, right? And they'll be fine. They will not eat the pieces they can't get down, okay? There won't be many, but they will not eat the pieces that are too big.
Great. Okay, so now I have a question here that I put up. Does it matter whether you use green peas or yellow?
I prefer the yellow peas. I believe the tannin, couple things. The tannin levels are a little bit lower in the yellow peas. And the birds really like yellow. So I find that they eat the yellow peas a little bit better than they do the green peas. They can be trained to eat any, but I lean a little more towards the yellow peas versus the green pea. All
right. Let me get to will this be recorded? Yes, it is being recorded, and I will post a replay both here and on our YouTube channel. So yes, definitely. And the next question, can too much flax for layer cause fishy eggs?
Yeah, that is part of the off flavoring of the flax or the linseed. It can kind of compound and make that fishy flavor. It can also kind of, smell almost like, paint thinner a little bit too. Obviously we hopefully don't know what paint thinner tastes like, but it's going to produce that off flavoring, especially when we also have it in combination with some extra fish meal and things like that too. We can get some off flavorings.
Okay, next one. Currently, I'm grinding my starter grower and developer in a mash form to eliminate sorting by the birds. Is there any negative effect by grinding that fine?
It actually slows down the digestive tract. So it's going to hold the birds back a little bit. you're not going to get it nearly as much gizzard action. So, I mean, I like it as coarse as the birds will take it, right? Look, whatever's left over in the feed trough, you can take it back and grind it again. But I want them to work for it a little bit, not make it too fine. That is a big thing. I see a lot of people that just think it has to be powdery and fine. And, when you pick up a handful of chicken feed, if it's not pelleted, you should be able to tell me what at least 60 to 70% of what you're holding in your hand, right? You should be able to separate it out. Oh, this is corn, this is wheat, this is, peas, this is whatever. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of feed out there that I can't tell you what's in it at all because it's ground so fine.
Maybe if we can sorting by the birds, sometimes that can be because there is too much feed put out. They are not, it's like it's a free feeding. There isn't an amount of ration that's put before the birds. Now you can do that for layers for chicks and all that. You want to have that free choice. But sometimes the height of the feeder will affect how much sorting they do. So all that is important. Do you want to cover that, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, feeder height, the lip of the feeder, whatever they have to reach over to get it, the lip of the feeder needs to be level with the average bird's back, right? And that minimizes sorting and wasting, and it actually makes the bird more efficient. So everybody on here has had chickens or is thinking about chickens, or how many people have ever flipped over their bucket and watched their birds eat? Okay. They have to pick it up off the ground. They have to get their head almost vertical to get it down, right? So it's a long ways from here to there. So if we shorten that distance, they're going to be much more efficient eaters. The other thing, there's things on the ground that I really don't want them eating. So minimizing spilled feed is going to be a health benefit for people. So yeah, we need to keep the feed and water up so the bird has to reach just a little bit for it.
Okay, let me go to the next comment here. Is alfalfa meal the same? So I think you had in your slide, it was alfalfa pellets or something. So
Yes, alfalfa meal is what we would be using in those rations.
okay, and here we go. If chickens are on pasture during spring, summer, and fall when grass is growing and bugs are plenty, does the protein need to be higher layer ration? I've been doing 15% and have been doing well. Big reason is trying to keep costs down, especially now when beans are so expensive.
I hear you on all that, but we typically like to keep the ration as everything that the bird would need for performance, because what's on pasture just is so variable. I understand that there is that, desire. I have the bugs there. I know they're eating them. But coming from the nutrition standpoint, we truly just don't know what is there day by day. We can't control how often there are bugs in that environment, or if they're being moved to an area quick enough to get new bugs. And then also when it comes to the forages, they are also very variable. The legumes are going to be the only ones that are really putting in a sizable amount of protein to the diet. And so it would depend on how much of that particular pasture was the highly digestible legumes.
I want to add to what Baylor just said, because a lot of people go out there and they see these big, huge numbers about insect, protein and so on. Those numbers are actually totally dehydrated insects. For instance, like a cricket with all of its moisture in its body is only going to be about 20 to 22% protein. So it's not that big boost. Same for a grasshopper, earthworm, etc. So when we're figuring out protein needs, we're looking at on the as-fed basis with the moisture included. And so the protein of insects is not huge it's not as high as we tend to think it is. So, I mean, the bugs are great. And what we also find is, and they're also full of fat, carbohydrates, and protein. When you truly have enough insects on the pasture, the birds will eat less of the total ration anyway. Okay. So they'll self-regulate their diet based on the insect availability. So there's no need to change the diet. So when there's a fresh crop of grasshoppers out there, they're not going to eat their feed that day. Just not going to do it, right? Because they'd rather have a grasshopper. And when the grasshoppers or the insects disappear, they'll go back to eating their normal amount of feed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and here, where can a person find fish meal in Alberta?
We're working on it, Steph. We're working on it. It's not that easy. We thought we had it, and then CFIA had to get difficult for us. So we're back to working on it. But
that's right. Yes, we're working on it. We had some crab meal available, which is slightly different, but is still a good animal protein. Unfortunately, the plant that we were getting it from just burned down 2 weeks ago, so we're back to square one on that one as well. But we're working on it. Here, can you soak grains for layers instead of grinding?
you can. A lot of people doing it. Depends on the size of your layer. Like bantams could struggle with some of the grain sizes, but I don't know where Nicole is. In Canada, you're going to have more small grains than you are going to have large grains. So, down here, a whole kernel of corn on a smaller bird could be a choking hazard. They're going to eat it. They'll probably get it down most of the time. But yeah, you can soak them. You need to be really careful with your soaking because you're looking at a 24 to 48 hour soak to get them soft enough, depending on the grain. You just need to make sure that you're not getting any secondary mold growth in those soaking pails, right? So just be really careful.
All right, next here. I am seeing many producers using black sunflower seeds for protein. How does that compare to sunflower meal?
So the whole sunflower seed is not going to be as high in protein as your meal. That's going to be true for any of those seeds that we talked about. If you have flaxseed versus flaxseed meal, the concentrated meal is going to be higher in protein. Plus, with the whole seed, you're getting some added fiber into it and some other factors too that are going to affect digestibility and the nutrients that you're getting. Yes, the whole black sunflower seed will also contribute some oil to it as well. But if you are looking for a concentrated protein source to take place of, the soybean or the soybean meal, any sunflower meal is going to be better than the whole seed.
All right. Next from Natalie. Hi, Natalie. I'm glad you could make it. So in my ration from Fertrell, I have vegetable oil included as an ingredient. I struggle with incorporating it evenly. It ends up becoming chunky, and I have resorted to eliminating it from the ration and use water to mix the fines. I have a small grinder and mix together manually 100 pounds in large feed cart. Are there any suggestions?
Mixing it by hand on a large feed cart, it's going to be, and I don't know which kind of oil she's using, and if it's raw oil or if it's, from an expeller press or if it's something that's been filtered down and processed. Oils are going to vary, and I'm not trying to make an excuse. In an Alberta winter, I would warm that oil quite nicely, and it'll disperse in the grains, a whole lot better. Yes. But I would not go out there at 20 or 30 below and expect the oil to work well. It's not
Yeah,
going to happen. So,
Natalie is in Ontario, but I think they get as harsh winters as we
okay.
or they can. They can anyways.
Yeah, it depends on the type of oil. Some oils are thicker than others, and they're not going to blend as well. You could try warming it. Look, the oil has a way bigger purpose than just, I think, we got off on adding the NutriBalancer and the oil to help it stick, and it's way more than just being a sticker. 5% of the diet needs to be from oil or fat, okay? So we're putting it in there for proper liver function, for good, feather shine, for the oil gland, for a lot of other purposes. So a good poultry diet will be between 5 and 7% fat. So if she has 5 to 7% fat from other things, then that's fine. I don't, we don't need the oil. But I want to be clear that it's not just about being for sticking. If it was only sticking, we'd add a little molasses or something. But no, we need the oil. Most poultry diets are deficient in fat content. And it's going to help the birds live better and longer.
Okay, so I have a question from Kelly. Hi, Kelly. Is soybean, soy meal free rations complete or as good as with the soybeans?
No, they're not. No. I mean, we do a lot, you ask Rachel or Baylor or any, we do more soy-free recipes on a daily basis than we do with soy because that's what people think they want. But as far as for the overall health and well-being of a chicken, the soy-free feeds will never perform 100% equally as a soybean, a diet with the right kind of soybean in it, right? And Kelly's using a roasted soybean that he gets from TIGA acres, and his birds are thriving. His new hatched birds that he got, or his chicks that he got last summer, late fall, are growing at an unbelievable rate. He can't actually believe it. He takes pictures and sends them to me. Can you believe this? Right? And I'm like, yeah, I can. But he's been raising chickens for a while, and so yeah, soy free is never going to keep up with. We don't have the quality proteins that we need, right? So soy free is not going to keep up with a soy based feed. I'm sorry to tell you, but we keep trying.
Mm-hmm. I know you are. Okay, here we go from Charna. I'm currently fermenting my grains, adding hot water to alfalfa cubes. I don't have easy access to alfalfa meal, and adding crab meal, NutriBalancer, and other supplements is grinding better. I only have a small flock, between 30 and 99 per year. So would grinding be better than the fermenting she's doing?
As long as she has a good ferment, one's equal to the other, right? As long as there's no mold, you don't get any off smelling, no putrid smell, anything like that. I'm fine with the fermenting, okay? But it needs to be in a controlled environment, and it needs to be done with caution and care. But it sounds like it's working very well for her, so I don't see a need to change it. To me, the process of fermenting is more labor intense than the process of grinding and mixing. But and I'm not going to tell you one's better than the other. So to me, those two processes are equal.
Okay. And next. I feed my poultry a lot of produce. Are there any vegetables that should not be fed to chickens?
I mean, they're not wild about raw potato. They'll eat them cooked. They still leave the potato skins behind. There's nothing really that I'm worried about a chicken. They're not going to eat it if it's harmful to them. So they would tell you that a lot of the nightshade family, you shouldn't feed the chickens. Look, I kept 25 birds in my backyard as an experimental group just to see, if my teenage daughter could kill them and they lived. They all lived. The raccoon got a couple, but my daughter didn't kill them. So, they got all the table scraps, including the meat pieces, on a daily basis, So we got to see what they wouldn't eat. And pretty much potato skins were about the only thing that they left behind.
Yeah, they don't seem to like onions and citrus peels either.
Citrus.
No.
Yeah, that they leave behind. They eat the inside of the orange, but they leave the peel. Do you want to touch on the amount of vegetables that should make up a diet? I'm sorry, Jeff. I'm just picking up this thing
I
there
know.
to
I
bring
don't
everything.
want to upset anybody tonight. We got people that think vegetables are good for chickens, and the chicken doesn't really care. Okay, they eat them. They like the green. They do eat them, but there's not absolutely, but there's very, very little nutritional value in greenery for poultry. Okay. And their diet at best should never exceed 10% of their total daily intake from actual vegetation or, plant material. That's about all they can process. If they get too much produce, and I've done this to my birds. So a lot of these things I'm telling you are from learning the hard way. Too much produce, and my egg whites got really watery and ran all the way across the pan, right, for a fried egg. I go back to feeding them just their diet, right, a little bit of table scraps, daily out of the kitchen, and the egg whites firmed right back up again, right, stood up nice in the pan. So if you want to know if you're feeding too much produce or too much vegetable matter, the egg whites will get runny.
The thing is too is that it interferes with the amount of the balanced ration that they are actually eating too. So it lowers the amount of protein that they are getting if the amount of vegetables. See, there is a program here that's called the Loop program. I don't know if you have that down in the States. It's where farmers or people who raise animals can go from stores and they can get their discarded, pretty much everything, like discarded vegetables, discarded dairy, discarded sandwiches, discarded meat, discarded baking. And so, it's free. So it's free food for your animals. But then there is just how much you can feed them and still it be something that's beneficial to the birds. Next question. What is your thoughts on feeding mealworms and how many can be safely consumed by laying hens?
Man. I mean, to me, mealworms are not cost effective. I mean, even if you raise them yourself, I still don't see how they're cost effective. They're a great treat for the birds. And, I don't care if the hen gets 15 or 20 mealworms. Now, if it's the super mealworms that are much bigger, then probably going to keep that down to 5 to 7. But a standard mealworm, you're not going to throw anything off. Again, the protein level of a mealworm, the fat, the protein, the amino acid profile of a mealworm is just about identical to a really good chicken feed. So you're not going to hurt the chicken by, you might get a little bit, depending on what the mealworm's eating, you might get a weird flavor to the egg, but you can feed all the mealworms you want. So if they're fresh. I get really nervous about the dehydrated mealworms that people are selling. I didn't know this until about a year ago. Like 90% of the mealworms are being imported from China, right? I had no clue. I thought that we had big mealworm ranches here in the US and Canada, and no, like the mealworms being sold on Amazon and Grubly and all those other, not Grubly, but Chewy, etc. Right? they're all grown. China is the #1 exporter of mealworms, and we're just buying them up.
That's good to know.
Yeah, scary to know.
Yeah, well, yeah, but it's good to know because scary, I guess. Because you wouldn't, I mean, yeah, like you say, you wouldn't know. Any meat products you can give a chicken? Recently, I've seen videos of people feeding deer, beef, pork bones as treats and extra protein.
You can feed it all as long as it's fresh and not putrid or rotten. You know, I had a lady in Canada, I believe over in Saskatchewan. She reached out to me. Her husband worked for a bear hunting guide service, and nobody takes their bear meat home. We worked on a chicken formula incorporating fresh ground bear meat, right? And how to make that, you know, part of the diet, or actually the primary protein for the diet. I have no problems with that. So as long as it's clean enough that you would consider eating it as a human, yeah, those chickens are going to be so happy. You throw in a shank of deer or something in there and just let them have at it. Yeah, they're going to be really happy chickens. So,
All right, that was raw bones, I should add.
yeah, there's not much they're going to get off the bones. You know, they're going to peck out the marrow. I mean, they're going to peck at the bones because they're trying to consume them, but there's only so much they're going to get off the bones.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and that was about the Loop program. That's the one that I was mentioning. A very long waiting list. Yeah, I'm sure there is a long waiting list. So while we wait for maybe more questions, I thought I might play the video of Karen mixing her feed because it's good to have a visual. So I'm going to get that playing and share my screen here. Share screen. This one, share.
This is Karen from Peak Poultry, and on the coldest day of the year so far in North Carolina, at a good 22 degrees now, a little bit after noon, Jeff said I had to record a video on making my own feed. I've been mixing my own feed for about 2 years now. It's not very complicated. You can choose to make it complicated, so I do that a little bit, but I'll show you what we do. Here's my ingredient storage. So that's Amy. Hi, Amy. So I got barrels. This isn't the main storage, but I got alfalfa and linseed meal, which is not in the feed I'm making now. That's more for the chicks. I use the Fertrell fish meal, soybean meal. I use full fat soybean meal. Cracked corn. I buy cracked corn. I do not have a mill to crack things myself. Which is okay for me since I pellet, but if you don't, you probably need to do that. Calcium carbonate is what I use still. Some Redmond conditioner, the Fertrell Poultry NutriBalancer, and whole barley is what's in this recipe I'm doing today. I'm going to get started, weigh this out, and I'll get back to you. All right, we're going to get it turned on and get our stuff added. So I'm going to put the soybean meal in first. And then I'm going to add the other ingredients. So everything's in there but the corn. Then I'm going to add some molasses as slowly as my patience will allow. Just dip that in there. The slower you can add it, the less chunks you have. It just helps sort of bind the fines to the bigger chunks that they're going to eat. More important if you weren't going to pellet it, but I still put it in. Now I'm going to mix that for a little bit while I measure out my corn. All right, so for this recipe, I need 34.65 pounds of corn. All right, we're gonna add the last of the corn, and then we'll let it finish mixing. So, right. Okay, now on to the loud part. We've got it out of the mixer, brought it over here to the pellet mill, and so you just add it little by little to the pellet mill, and then it comes out as pellets. It's warm when it comes out, so it's best to let it cool off a little bit before you add it to your storage bin. So we take the trays and put them over here to cool off under the fan. And if they cool off a little bit, I just take those tubs and take them back to my new toy, because my birds are no longer on my place. So I just put them back in the tubs, and I take them over and then put them in the storage containers over where the birds are.
All right. I thought it was interesting to see her do it, because it's a fairly small scale production. So I thought it was interesting to share. And here is another question. What are the benefits of adding molasses to the feed or the water?
I only use molasses when there's a stress condition. The birds can smell it. So if they're stressed and they're not eating, or if you're moving them from one building to another building, or you're handling them a lot, or you change their environment, a very small amount of molasses added to their feed and water will help them with that adjustment, right? So they can smell it, they can detect it. It's going to encourage them to drink more, get their appetite going. But I don't like to use molasses on a regular basis, So Karen has quit using molasses, just so everybody knows. That video was done a couple years ago. And she was just trying to figure out how to get her fines to bind a little bit so they didn't settle out during mixing. She didn't use oil because, if you remember, she used full fat roasted soybeans. So her fat level was already where it needed to be. So we didn't have room to add more vegetable oil to her diets. But go easy on the molasses, because it can cause diarrhea, loose stools. The birds eat it. It's candy, but it's not necessarily good for them. So.
Okay, and there is the next one here. Is there a ration-based software we can use to formulate our own chicken feed?
I mean, there's a lot out there. There's not any free ones, but there's programs out there. There's even some free ones that they're homemade, they're homemade spreadsheets. A lot of people just do something on Microsoft Excel. But the ones floating around the internet, the protein levels that they've loaded into the spreadsheets are not accurate. So just be careful. Ahmed, there's a lot of people that just, reach out to Ingrid, or they reach out to Baylor or Rachel or I, for help getting that. Huh?
At this email address right there that I just put up.
Yeah. So yeah, we help a lot of folks. A lot of the folks watching the show right now, we've helped them formulate their own, chicken feeds best we can with what's locally available. Now, I'm not saying that they're all perfect. Like I said, we do the best we can with what we have to work with.
So if you are in the US, you can write that email address directly, livestock@fertrell.com. If you are in Canada, you're free to email me at tigaacres@outlook.com, and I'll help you with what you need. Next question here. What does Redmond conditioner add to a ration? Is it needed if already using the PNB? So I think Karen is using some of that in her ration there. The Redmond conditioner, is it needed if you're using the PNB, and what is it for?
It's not necessarily needed, but in her case, it helps hold a pellet together a lot better. The other thing is if we don't know the grain supply is perfectly clean and doesn't have mycotoxins, the Redmond conditioner will help bind, unwanted mycotoxins in a feed and allow them to pass through the bird without being harmful. So I like a little bit in there. That's just personal preference.
Okay, another question here. I love to see the actual identifiable grains in the ration, but would you suggest for optimal health, it is recommended to pellet feed if possible to ensure the birds are actually consuming the whole ration and not picking what they prefer? This may allow for eliminating waste of fines. Pellets? To pellet or to not pellet? That is the question.
I mean, we get this question pretty often, and our response is usually that if you really want to pellet, feel free to pellet. However, if you're going to produce a mash feed, if you are restricted feeding, which you should hopefully be doing, especially for mature birds, then you can get them to eat the fines. And if you can't do it just through restrictive feeding, you can do it by adding a little bit of water at the end, or putting it in a different dish and adding a little bit of water. Maybe if you have a little bit of the scraps we've been talking about, maybe a little bit of milk, you could put that on the fines. There are a lot of ways to get them to consume the fines without having to pellet.
Yes, I guess the nature of the chicken would be to have different pieces and pick what they like, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And if you are free feeding consistently and never really inciting them to eat those fines, you can have a very large fine buildup.
Yes.
So you will have to deal with that some way, but yeah.
Right. Okay, I have another question here. Yeah, I love Jeff's t-shirt too. I've said that before. My current rations are corn and soybean meal plus fish meal, aragonite, NutriBalancer, and alfalfa meal. It's currently simple and easy. Would it be beneficial to add another grain?
So I'm always a big fan of, if it's working for you, keep doing it. If your birds are doing well on it, there's no reason to change. As you said, it's simple and easy, which is a good thing for your management style. And again, as long as it's a complete ration and providing everything that the birds need, then there's no reason to go and change it. Now, obviously, if you're looking at maybe making a more cost-effective ration, or one of those grains become unavailable, then we might want to consider, looking at adding another grain. But everything that you have on there is what we recommend in our base ration. So, there wouldn't be a benefit or a negative necessarily to adding anything else. But again, as you said, it's simple and easy, and hopefully the birds are doing well on it.
Yes, I would also add that some of the rations that we presented tonight maybe are geared more towards what you can easily find locally down in the States, perhaps in Ontario, Quebec, like corn is readily available there. Here in the prairies, not so much. So usually we work with a different energy source. So you can work with wheat, oats, barley. We can make rations with those those ingredients as well. You just need to reach out, and then we can help you with that. Things are different depending on where you live, and the price might be different too. You might be able to find corn, but it's so expensive that you want to go to something else. So things can be worked with without too much trouble. Here is a question from Steph. How fine should a chick starter be? So are we able to, let me here, I've got your PowerPoint presentation. I'm just going to go to the to the last page that was showing the rations. And you. Oops, very cool. Okay, so now back here. So there, I'm going to put it full screen so that you can see it. So if Baylor or Rachel want to comment on that, or Jeff, I've got the pictures up.
Yep, the ones on the left would be suitable for a starter. So you can see there are some larger corn pieces, and if you really get down and look, you can see ground wheat and beans, as well as the fines. And I cannot remember off the top of my head the different screen sizes, Jeff. I think it's 5/16 for corn. Am I right?
Yeah, 3/8. 3/8 for corn, 5/16
Okay.
for peas or roasted soybeans, or pretty much everything else you can use a 5/16. But yeah, on a large like tractor mount grinder mixer, you're looking at 3/8 for corn, for shelled corn. But
Okay.
yeah, these are actual, Fertrell customer feed pictures. And of course they're like, they send me this picture and they're like, is that okay for chicks to eat? And I'm like, yeah, that's perfect. That's like the best looking feed I've ever seen in my life. So look, if they can get their beak around it, they can eat it. So let's not be overly protective of our chickens.
Okay, and let's back here. Okay, so NutriBalancer currently in stock by Sundry, correct? Yes, we are buying Sundry, and it's actually on its way. I expect more in 2 or 3 weeks, depending on how the trucking companies work from Pennsylvania to here. If you'd like to send me an email, I can let you know when it's back in stock. And Natalie, thank you for coming. I'm glad we were able to answer your questions. And here, do you consult on other livestock mixes like sheep and pig rations?
We do all classes of livestock, all classes of animals. Baylor was working on a catfish ration. We do lots of whatever you need help with. You can feel free to email us, and we will put something together for you.
I've done parakeets. We've done lab rats, guinea pigs. So yeah, in this niche world that we live in, yes, we do all the livestock.
Yes, I wanted to go back to something. There was somebody asking where they could find, rations. We do have a spreadsheet that I can provide, and then this book here, Jeff's book has a lot of information. It's got some sample rations as well. So, I would say, and I'm not biased at all, I truly believe what I'm saying. Anybody who thinks about mixing their own ration should read this book first, for several reasons. The first one being, it's going to save you a lot of money. It's going to prevent you from making mistakes that are easily preventable. If you read that book, it's, why find a hard way when somebody already did and put it in writing so that you don't have to go through the same mistakes is basically what it is. There is a lot in just that book. I've actually had people tell me that there is more in that book than in all the chicken books they had on their bookshelf. So it's, well, you can laugh all you want, Jeff. That's what it is. So So do we have any other questions? There was actually one here that I left for the end, and we can go through it. I just need to find it again. Here it is. If you want to save this till last, what is your thoughts on the chicken feed conspiracy going rampant on Facebook and TikTok, and what do you think the cause is? Is it the least cost formulation a cause?
Okay, so there is a pattern, there is a problem. We don't know how far wide reaching it is. Initially, I thought it was a bad grain supply that was high in mycotoxins, but I'm not. I mean, mycotoxins have been around for a while, so I'm not saying that it's just a mycotoxin issue. I have a weird gut feeling. This is only a theory now. There's no proof to this. But the really large commercial feed manufacturers that you see on the shelf, right? The Nutrinas, the Purinas, the Cargills, all of those, they're constantly buying least cost ingredients. And somebody brought it up the other day. I wonder if it's trace minerals that they're importing from China that, something went wrong in the process or somehow got contaminated, or, they're importing their vitamins and their trace minerals and all of that from China because they're the least cost, right? I mean, that's what the world has driven us to is, get it cheaper. Everybody wants cheaper. Well, I think that's my gut feeling is it's something that we've imported that has an issue. Now, some of the articles that you see are floating around about having twice as much glyphosate and things like that, I don't know. I don't see enough supporting evidence. Okay, I'm doing this for a long time, but I don't see enough supporting evidence that would be the issue. I'm not saying that it can't be, but I don't think that's the primary issue. That's, the birds have been exposed to glyphosate now for over 20 years, right? As long as it's been on the market, it's being used. They've been, their parent stock has been conditioned to feeds that have some level of glyphosate residue to them. So that's going to continue to build up. And so I just don't think it's a glyphosate thing. I think it's more of an imported trace mineral issue, or some import. I really think. Can't put my finger on it yet. So there's a bunch of independent testing getting done right now as we speak. American Pasture and Poultry Producers Association, APA, as some people know it. They are soliciting a lot of growers to send in samples to get them analyzed to see what we can find. Okay. We're going to know more in a couple weeks, but right now, we just don't know. And so part of it, Aaron, is, it's pushing, it's part of the least cost mentality, right? So, but what exactly it is, we don't know yet, right? We're still looking. So I only gave you my theory, so don't run with that and put it out there on Facebook. Jeff said it's imported trace minerals, right? I don't need that heat coming down on my head yet, but we're working on it. So.
All right. And Beverly, thank you so much. I just want to comment that PNB is such a great product, and I'm super grateful for the Fertrell support in developing my ration. Well, I'm glad we can help. Here. Thank you guys for all you do. I have enjoyed working with you over the last several years. You guys are great. Yeah, I think so too, guys. Not talking about myself, I'm talking about you guys. The way you process emails and all that, it's incredible. And Angel, thank you for coming. Thank you everybody for coming and to participate in this. Are there any other questions before I let Jeff, Baylor, and Rachel go to bed? They are 2 hours ahead of us, and they still have to get home.
Well, two of them are already home. I got about 15 minutes to get home from here, so it's not too bad. But my
Yeah.
dogs are missing me for the evening bowl of popcorn. So yeah,
All right.
Yeah.
Actually, three of us are home because I'm home too.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah, you're welcome, Steph. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Joni, for coming. And let me see here. I've got something else. Okay, that's just. It seems that there will be a replay of this that I will be posting on our page and on the YouTube channel that we have. If you need to contact us, you can do that through our website. You can email me if you need. And if you are in the States, you can contact Fertrell directly at this email address. All right. If there is nothing else, we can call it a night. Thank you so much, guys, for everything.
Later.
All right. Thank you.